Isabelle Toledano-Koutsouris is with us. She's head of private capital markets at UBS. And I'd say your job seems really exciting, Isabelle. You link investment bankers that have, these companies that need to be funded with private markets that can give them the capital they need. What kind of companies are you seeing that need to go to private markets or want to go to prefer to go to private markets rather than going public?
Well, thank you very much for the vote of confidence. That's great. In terms of companies, I think companies that look to disrupt businesses. So we've spent time focusing obviously on growth companies who look to raise money, be it through equity or other instruments. My group focuses on debt to equity, so everything across. And you've got also sort of family-owned businesses, privately held businesses that are looking to raise money in different ways and don't necessarily want to or can access public markets.
Yeah, and what is it about public markets that makes it difficult for some of those very experimental, disruptive businesses to successfully raise money there? You've mentioned, I know in the past, the short-term nature, short-term thinking. Is that a reason to go to private markets, or is that a reason to fix the short-term nature of public markets?
That's a question I'm not sure I can completely answer, but I can give you some elements with regards to that. So first thing first is some of these disruptive businesses we know have been, either pre-revenue or revenue generative, but not profitable, which is clearly not suited for the public market at this point.
Makes them difficult to value.
Correct, and you need the runway to prove the business case as you're disrupting industries. So I think private markets has been seen as more long-term focus. As opposed to public markets. So whether you should change public market or it's good to have a private market that's here to stay to cater for that until it goes there, that's something to think about.
We know the complaints of, famous cases like Michael Dell, who want to get out of the quarterly reporting process and focus on growth. But I wonder if private investors aren't even more active than public investors. Do private investors tend to take a more active role in your experience?
They do. You're absolutely right. I mean, in terms of the transaction that we bring, which are direct investments, people, tend to be active and we have very different pool of private capital, of course, and this different pool bring different skill set to the table and different ways of being active.
Yeah, and speaking of activism, I mean, one area we've seen a lot of talk about activism recently is around ESG and in particular, around climate change and the environment. Do you sense that private markets are going to be less concerned about that, given maybe less scrutiny in the private space versus the public, or is it going to preoccupy thinking in those boardrooms as well?
I don't think there will be less, because I think it's a very exciting trend. So I think private market is also driven by thematic long-term trends. So if you look at the way that, government regulation is progressing in that space and in the shifting consumer trends, that trend is here to stay. And actually, it's one of the most exciting growth opportunities of the next decade.
So it's exciting in the growth space, but what about those there are thoughts about stranded assets and about companies that are in spaces that are not going to be so exciting and attractive, but maybe still needed, extractive industries, for example. And there is some concern that maybe they will find it difficult to be in the public sector. Maybe they end up in the private space as a result.
I think, when we look at, I'll give you statistics, when we look at private investors that we surveyed, 82% of them say they want to invest in sustainable business, and 80% of them want to invest with companies that fit their values. So far, 44% of them have invested in sustainable companies, so that gives you sort of the shift that's happening there as well.
Yeah.
How illiquid are private company investments, Isabelle? I mean, if one of your investors, private or institutional, comes and says, I need to monetize this asset, can you do it quickly?
So they tend to be liquid, and that's the nature of the business. I think the market is moving towards creating some form of liquidity for investors in general, and secondary markets are progressing and developing. So I think as private markets are here to stay, you will see increasing ways of creating liquidity, even though it's never going to be, of course, as fast and liquid as the liquid markets.
Is an IPO or a sale still the preferred exit for a private investor, or are they happy to hold their stake and collect dividends or watch capital increase?
I think so far exit was the more traditional way, and IPO as well. But I think more and more it's a mix of people who are also quite happy to hold their assets, as you said.